The dust settled around Adelaide Crawford's feet as she watched the last wagon disappear over the ridge, leaving nothing but wheel tracks and broken promises in its wake. She stood there in the Nevada territory, somewhere between Carson City and the California border, clutching her carpetbag with trembling hands while the September sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet. The wagon master had made his decision clear that morning when her traveling companions, the Hendersons, had succumbed to cholera during the night. No one would risk keeping her, not even for the $60 she had left to her name. Fear was a powerful motivator, and compassion had no place when death rode alongside you. Adelaide was 22 years old, alone in a landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction, with nothing but sagebrush and distant mountains to keep her company. She had left Boston 3 months ago with dreams of teaching school in Sacramento, but those dreams seemed as distant now as the ocean she had crossed by rail and wagon. Her throat was parched, her water nearly gone, and the reality of her situation began to settle over her like a suffocating blanket. She started walking westward, following the wagon tracks because it was the only direction that made sense. Her boots, fine leather things that had seemed so practical in Boston, were already rubbing blisters on her heels. The carpetbag grew heavier with each step, but she could not bring herself to abandon her few possessions. Inside were 3 dresses, her teaching certificate, a small Bible her mother had given her, and a daguerreotype of her parents who had died the previous winter. Everything else she owned in this world had been on the Henderson wagon, including her trunk with her winter clothes and the rest of her money. The sun climbed higher as she walked, and Adelaide knew she should find shelter, but there was nothing. No trees, no rocks large enough to provide shade, just the endless rolling hills covered in scrub. She drank the last of her water around midday and kept walking because stopping meant dying. Her lips cracked, her face burned despite the bonnet, and her vision began to swim in the heat. She did not know how long she had been walking when she stumbled. Her foot caught on something, a rock or her own exhaustion, and she fell hard onto the dusty ground. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment she just lay there, tasting dirt and defeat. She tried to push herself up, but her arms shook with the effort. Perhaps this was how it would end, she thought. Perhaps she would simply become another nameless grave along the trail, marked by nothing more than a pile of stones if anyone bothered to bury her at all. That was when she heard the horse. At first she thought it was a hallucination, her desperate mind conjuring rescue where none existed. But the sound of hooves on hard ground was too real, too solid. She managed to lift her head and saw through blurred vision a dark shape approaching. A horse and rider, moving at an easy lope across the desert floor. "Help," she tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat too dry to produce sound. The rider must have seen her anyway because the horse's pace quickened. Adelaide let her head drop back down to the ground, relieved and terrified in equal measure. Out here, a lone woman could not afford to trust strangers, but she also had no choice. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" The voice was male, deep and concerned. She felt strong hands on her shoulders, turning her over gently. Cool water touched her lips, and she drank greedily until the canteen was pulled away. "Easy now, not too much at once. You will make yourself sick." Adelaide forced her eyes open and found herself looking into a sun-weathered face with clear gray eyes that held genuine worry. The man was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore working clothes, a faded blue shirt and leather vest with a bandana around his neck. "The wagon train," Adelaide managed to croak. "They left me." Something flickered in those gray eyes, Anger, perhaps, or disgust at her abandonment. "Can you ride?" he asked instead of commenting on the wagon train's cruelty. "I think so." "Good. My ranch is about 5 miles north. You need to get out of this sun before you get heat stroke." He helped her sit up slowly, letting her adjust to the movement. "I am Dalton Edwards. I have a spread up near the Carson River. Adelaide Crawford. I was heading to Sacramento to teach school." "Well, Miss Crawford, today you are heading to my ranch because that is the closest safe place." He stood and offered her his hand. "Can you stand?" She could, barely. Her legs felt like water and she swayed dangerously. Dalton Edwards caught her around the waist with one strong arm and guided her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patiently despite having a stranger approach. "I am going to put you up first, then mount behind you. Is that acceptable?" Adelaide nodded. Propriety seemed absurd when the alternative was death. He lifted her into the saddle with surprising ease, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold her steady, and he took the reins in his other hand. "Hold on to the saddle horn if you feel faint. We will take it slow." The ride to the ranch took longer than 5 miles should have required, but Dalton kept the horse to a careful walk, perhaps sensing that anything faster would jostle Adelaide beyond her endurance. She drifted in and out of awareness, conscious mainly of the solid warmth at her back and the arm that kept her from falling. "Almost there," Dalton said quietly as they crested a low rise. Adelaide opened her eyes and saw a welcome sight. A small valley opened before them with a ribbon of silver water running through it. Trees grew along the riverbank, real cottonwoods and willows, creating blessed shade. A house stood on a gentle slope overlooking the water, a solid structure of wood and stone that looked like it had been built to last. Nearby were a barn, a corral with several horses, and other outbuildings. "It is not much," Dalton said, and she could hear embarrassment in his voice. "But it is home." "It looks wonderful," Adelaide said honestly. After hours in the brutal sun with nothing but desert around her, his small ranch looked like paradise. They rode down into the valley, and Adelaide could feel the temperature drop several degrees in the shade of the trees. Dalton guided the horse to the house and dismounted, then helped Adelaide down. Her legs buckled immediately and he caught her again. "I have got you. Let us get you inside." The interior of the house was dim and blessedly cool. Adelaide had a vague impression of simple but well-made furniture, clean floors and windows with real glass before Dalton led her to a bedroom. "This was my mother's room," he said, helping her sit on the bed. "She passed 2 years ago. You can rest here. I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. You are in need of help." He moved to a washstand and poured water into a basin. "I will bring you something to eat and drink. Try to stay awake a little longer so you can get some fluids in you, then you can sleep." He left, and Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she had woken in a wagon surrounded by people who feared her. Now she was in a stranger's house, dependent on his kindness for her very survival. It should have terrified her, but there had been something solid and trustworthy in Dalton Edwards' manner. He had not looked at her with pity or suspicion, just concern. He returned carrying a tray with a bowl of soup, bread, and a pitcher of water. "It is just bean soup, but it will help. Try to eat slowly." Adelaide obeyed, taking small sips of the soup. It was good, well seasoned and hearty. She had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. "How long were you walking?" Dalton asked, sitting in a chair near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "Since this morning. The wagon train left at dawn." "Why did they leave you?" Adelaide set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished. "The family I was traveling with, the Hendersons, died of cholera last night. The wagon master decided I was too much of a risk to keep with the train. Dalton's jaw tightened. You showed no signs of sickness. None. I had been helping nurse them, but I felt fine. I still feel fine, apart from the sun exposure. She met his eyes. I understand if you want me to leave once I have rested. I would not want to bring illness to your home. Cholera incubates fast. If you were going to get sick, you would be showing symptoms by now. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That wagon master was a coward who condemned you to death rather than wait a day or two to be sure you were healthy. The blunt assessment of her situation made tears prick at Adelaide's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough on that long walk. Well, I suppose I owe you my life then, Mr. Edwards. Dalton, please, and you do not owe me anything. Any decent human would have done the same. The wagon train would disagree with you. Then they were not decent humans. He stood. Finish eating, then sleep. We can figure out what comes next after you have recovered. Adelaide wanted to ask what he meant by that, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She finished the soup and bread, drank 2 full glasses of water, and then allowed herself to lie back on the bed. The last thing she remembered was Dalton draping a light blanket over her and the sound of his boots on the floor as he left the room. When Adelaide woke, the light coming through the window was golden with evening. She sat up slowly, relieved to find that her head no longer pounded and her vision was clear. Her face felt tight from sunburn and her lips were still cracked, but otherwise she felt remarkably better. She stood and went to the washstand where she cleaned her face and hands as best she could, wincing at her reflection in the small mirror. Her skin was an angry red, and her blonde hair had escaped its pins to hang in limp tangles around her face. She attempted to make herself presentable, re-pinning her hair and smoothing her dress, though both were hopeless causes after her ordeal. Then she ventured out of the bedroom to find her host. The main room of the house served as both kitchen and living area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged before it. The kitchen area had a good stove, a table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Everything was neat and orderly, which surprised Adelaide slightly. She had expected a bachelor's household to show more neglect. Dalton was not inside, so Adelaide moved to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dalton stood near the corral, forking hay to the horses. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone who had done the same task thousands of times. Adelaide walked toward him, her steps still a bit unsteady. He noticed her approach and set down the pitchfork. You should have stayed in bed longer. I have slept enough. I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life. No thanks necessary. He pulled off his work gloves and tucked them into his belt. How are you feeling? Much better. Sore and sunburned, but alive. That is what matters. He gestured back toward the house. Are you hungry? I was about to start dinner. Please let me help. It is the least I can do. Dalton looked like he might protest, but instead he nodded. All right, I will not turn down help in the kitchen. They walked back to the house together, and Adelaide found herself acutely aware of him in a way she had not been earlier. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who did physical labor daily. His hands were calloused and scarred, working hands that had nevertheless been gentle when helping her. Inside, Dalton showed her where he kept his supplies, and together they prepared a simple meal of fried potatoes, bacon, and eggs. Adelaide had expected awkwardness, cooking with a strange man in close quarters, but instead found it surprisingly comfortable. Dalton moved around the kitchen with confidence, and he seemed content to work in companionable silence rather than forcing conversation. When they sat down to eat, Adelaide finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happens now? I mean, I need to continue to Sacramento, but I have no way to get there." Dalton set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "The nearest town is Stockton, about 30 miles south. There is a stage that runs through there twice a week, heading to Sacramento. I can take you there in a couple of days once you have recovered fully." "I appreciate that, but I should tell you that my funds are limited. I have $60, which needs to cover my stage fare and lodging until I can secure a teaching position. The stage fare to Sacramento is about $5. You will have enough." He resumed eating, then added, "You are welcome to stay here until you are ready to travel. No charge." Adelaide felt her throat tighten with gratitude. "You are very kind. I am practical. Sending you off before you are strong enough would just mean finding you collapsed on the trail again." She smiled despite herself. "Still, not everyone would open their home to a stranger. I was raised to help people when they need it. My mother would come back and haunt me if I did anything less." "Tell me about her," Adelaide said, wanting to know more about the man who had rescued her. Dalton's expression softened. "She was a good woman. Tough as nails, had to be to survive out here. She came west with my father in '49 during the gold rush. They never struck it rich, but they built this place together. My father died when I was 15, thrown from a horse, broke his neck. My mother kept the ranch going until the fever took her 2 years back. I am sorry, it must be lonely here by yourself." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it is honest work and I like the quiet. I run cattle mostly, sell them in Stockton or Virginia City depending on prices. I have 2 hired hands who come during roundup and branding, but otherwise it is just me." "And you never wanted to marry, have a family?" The question came out before Adelaide could stop herself, and she immediately felt her face flush even redder than the sunburn. "I apologize, that was too forward. It is all right." Dalton pushed his empty plate away. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Woman named Sarah from Stockton. She came out to see the ranch, took one look at how isolated it was and broke things off. Said she could not live so far from civilization. That must have been difficult. It was for the best. If she could not see herself here, it would never have worked." He met Adelaide's eyes. "What about you? No husband waiting in Sacramento?" "No. I was engaged briefly back in Boston, but he married my cousin instead when my parents died and I lost my inheritance. Apparently love was not enough without a dowry. Then he was a fool." The simple statement, delivered with complete sincerity, made Adelaide's heart skip. She looked down at her plate to hide her reaction. "Well, we have both had our disappointments then. Seems that way." Dalton stood and began clearing the table. "But disappointments make us stronger, I suppose." They washed the dishes together, falling back into that comfortable silence. When they finished, darkness had fallen completely and Adelaide felt exhaustion creeping back. "I should let you rest," Dalton said. "Take the bedroom again. I will sleep out here on the sofa." "I cannot take your bed for another night." "Yes, you can and you will. I have slept on that sofa plenty of times. It is comfortable enough." He went to the fireplace and banked the coals. "If you need anything during the night, just call out." Adelaide wanted to argue further, but she was too tired. "Thank you, Dalton, for everything. Sleep well, Adelaide." She returned to the bedroom, changed into her nightdress and slipped under the covers. Through the wall, she could hear Dalton moving around, settling in for the night. It should have been strange, being alone in a house with a man she had just met, but instead it felt safe. For the first time since leaving Boston, Adelaide felt like perhaps things might work out after all. The next morning, Adelaide woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in her least rumpled dress and joined Dalton in the kitchen. "Good morning," he he said, looking up from the stove. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks. That bed is very comfortable. My mother always insisted on a good mattress, said life was hard enough without poor sleep making it worse." He poured her a cup of coffee. "I need to ride out and check on the cattle today. You are welcome to come along if you feel up to it, or you can rest here." Adelaide considered. She was still sore, but the thought of spending the day alone while still feeling like an intruder in his home did not appeal to her. "I would like to come if I would not be in the way." "You would not be. Can you ride?" "I learned as a girl, though it has been some years." "I have a gentle mare you can use. We will take it easy." After breakfast, Dalton led Adelaide to the barn and introduced her to a pretty chestnut mare named Rosie. The horse had a kind eye and stood patiently while Dalton saddled her. "She is a good girl, not spooky at all. If you need to stop at any point, just say so." Adelaide mounted with only a little difficulty, pleased that her body remembered the motion even if her muscles protested. Dalton swung onto his bay gelding, and they rode out of the yard together. The morning was beautiful, cool and clear, with the sun just beginning to warm the air. Dalton led them along the river, pointing out landmarks and explaining his property boundaries. He had about 300 acres, he told her, which was modest by some standards, but plenty for one man to manage alone. "I keep about 50 head of cattle," he explained as they rode across a meadow where several cows grazed with their calves. "Mostly Herefords. They are hardy and do well on the range eland." Adelaide watched him as he surveyed his herd with a practiced eye. There was pride in his voice when he talked about his ranch, but also affection. This was not just property to him, it was home in the deepest sense. "You love it here," she observed. "I do. I know it seems like the middle of nowhere to most people, but to me it is perfect. I have water, good grass, and enough space that I do not have neighbors breathing down my neck." He smiled at her. "Though I suppose it is not for everyone." "It is beautiful," Adelaide said honestly. "Peaceful." They spent the morning riding the property, Dalton checking his cattle and water sources while explaining his operation to Adelaide. She found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the challenges of ranching and the daily rhythms of his work. He seemed pleased by her curiosity, answering thoroughly and without condescension. Around midday, they stopped by a bend in the river where willows provided shade. Dalton had packed sandwiches and canteens, and they sat on the bank eating and watching the water flow past. "How did you decide to become a teacher?" Dalton asked. "My mother was a teacher before she married. I grew up surrounded by books and I always loved learning. After my parents died and my engagement ended, I needed a fresh start. A friend wrote that California needed teachers desperately, so I decided to go west." Adelaide pulled up a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "I probably should have taken a ship around the Cape or at least gone by train the whole way, but I thought the wagon train would be more economical. It would have been if they had not abandoned you. Well, there is no point dwelling on it now. I survived thanks to you." She looked at him. "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere with more people?" "Sometimes I go to Stockton or Virginia City and think about how easy it would be to live where you can buy what you need instead of making it yourself. But then I come back here, and I realize I would hate living in town. Too crowded, too noisy, too many people in your business." Adelaide laughed. "I suppose coming from Boston, where people are practically living on top of each other, this seems wonderfully spacious to me. Have you been in California long?" "Only as long as I have been on the trail. We crossed into the territory about a week ago." She paused. "Is it very different from Nevada?" "Not especially, at least not this part of California. Once you get closer to Sacramento, there are more farms, more development, but out here it is much the same on both sides of the border." They talked for another hour, conversation flowing easily between them. Adelaide found herself laughing more than she had in months, and she noticed that Dalton seemed more relaxed too, the guarded expression he sometimes wore softening into genuine smiles. When they finally rode back to the ranch, the sun was beginning its afternoon descent. Adelaide felt pleasantly tired, her muscles aching but not painfully so. As they unsaddled the horses and turned them into the corral, she realized she had enjoyed the day more than she had enjoyed anything in recent memory. That evening followed the pattern of the previous one, with them cooking and eating together in companionable comfort. Afterward, Adelaide insisted on mending a tear she had noticed in one of Dalton's shirts, and he sat near the fire cleaning his rifle while she worked. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I want to. You have done so much for me. Let me do something in return. You helped with the cooking and dishes. That is plenty. Mending a shirt takes no time at all." Adelaide bit off the thread and held up the garment to inspect her work. "There. Good as new. Thank you." Dalton set aside his rifle and stood stretching. "I should warn you, there is a storm coming tomorrow. I can feel it in my bones. Should we go to Stockton before it hits? No need. It is just rain, maybe some thunder. We will be cozy enough here." He moved to the window and looked out at the clear evening sky. "Besides, another day or two of rest will not hurt you." Adelaide knew she should protest, should insist that she had imposed long enough, but the truth was she did not want to leave yet. The ranch felt peaceful in a way Boston never had, and Dalton's company was surprisingly pleasant. She told herself it was just relief at being safe after her ordeal. But a small part of her knew it was more than that. The storm arrived as predicted the next afternoon, rolling in from the west with dark clouds and rumbling thunder. Adelaide and Dalton spent the morning preparing, bringing in extra firewood and securing anything that might blow away. By the time the first raindrops fell, they were safely inside with the doors and shutters closed against the weather. The rain came in a torrent, drumming on the roof and streaming off the eaves. Lightning flashed, followed by cracks of thunder that shook the house. Adelaide stood at the window, watching the display with a mixture of awe and slight nervousness. "It is quite a storm," she said. "We needed the rain. It has been a dry year." Dalton added wood to the fire, building it up against the damp chill. "The river might flood a bit, but we are high enough that it will not reach us. Have you ever been flooded out?" "Once, when I was a boy. We lost part of the barn and some livestock. My father rebuilt higher up the slope after that." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "Are you afraid of storms?" "Not really. I find them beautiful actually, as long as I am safe and dry. Then you should enjoy this one. It will probably last most of the night." He was right. The storm settled in for the long haul, rain falling steadily while thunder rumbled overhead. They spent the afternoon and evening inside, reading by firelight and playing cards. Dalton had a surprising collection of books, mostly practical volumes on ranching and animal husbandry, but also some novels and even a volume of poetry. "My mother loved to read," he explained when Adelaide commented on the books. "She insisted I learn to appreciate literature, not just functional knowledge." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. You would have liked her, I think. She had a lot of strong opinions and was not afraid to share them. As darkness fell and the storm continued its assault, Adelaide found herself reluctant for the day to end. She and Dalton had talked about everything from books to politics to their childhoods, and she realized she had learned more about him in a few days than she had learned about her former fiancé in months. "I should let you sleep," Dalton finally said, when Adelaide yawned for the third time. "Morning comes early, storm or no storm. Thank you for a lovely day, even if we were stuck inside." I enjoyed it too. He stood and banked the fire. Sleep well, Adelaide. Good night, Dalton. Adelaide lay in bed listening to the rain and thinking about the man on the other side of the wall. He was nothing like what she had expected to find in the West. There was a gentleness to him that contrasted with his rough exterior, a thoughtfulness that showed itself in small gestures and careful words. She found herself wondering what it would be like to stay here, to build a life in this quiet valley with the river running through it. The thought startled her. She had known Dalton Edwards for 3 days. It was absurd to be thinking about any kind of future with him. She was going to Sacramento to teach school, and he was staying here on his ranch. In a few days, she would board the stage and never see him again. The thought made her chest ache in a way she did not want to examine too closely. The storm broke sometime before dawn, and Adelaide woke to silence and the smell of wet earth. She dressed and went out to find Dalton already up and preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The storm passed. If you are still set on going to Stockton, we could leave today or tomorrow." Adelaide poured herself coffee and sat at the table, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "I suppose I should not impose any longer. It is not an imposition." Dalton set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "But I know you have a life to get to in Sacramento." "Yes, my teaching position." The words felt hollow somehow. They ate in silence, the easy companionship of the previous days strained by the knowledge that their time together was ending. After breakfast, Dalton went out to check for storm damage while Adelaide cleaned the kitchen, moving slowly as if delaying the inevitable. She was washing the last dish when Dalton came back inside, his expression troubled. "What is wrong?" Adelaide asked immediately. "The bridge over the river is out, the one on the road to Stockton. The storm must have weakened it, and the flood waters took it down." "How do we get to Stockton then?" "There is a ford about 10 miles upstream, but it will take a few days for the water level to drop enough to cross safely." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I am sorry, Adelaide, you are stuck here a while longer." Adelaide knew she should be frustrated by the delay, but instead she felt a little surge of relief. "It cannot be helped. Nature does not follow our schedules." "No, it does not." Dalton looked at her searchingly. "Are you sure you do not mind? I know you are anxious to reach Sacramento." "A few more days will not matter. The school can wait." She smiled at him. "Besides, I have been enjoying the peace here. Boston was so crowded and rushed, always noise and people." "This is a nice change." Something shifted in Dalton's expression, a warmth replacing the worry. "I am glad you see it that way. Some people find the isolation unbearable. I am not some people." "No," he said softly, "you are not." The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Adelaide helped with the cooking and household chores while Dalton tended to the ranch work. They rode out together in the mornings when the weather permitted, and Adelaide found herself learning the land almost as well as Dalton knew it. He showed her where the wild strawberries grew along the river, where a family of foxes had their den, and the best place to watch the sunset over the western mountains. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. Adelaide learned about Dalton's childhood, his dreams of expanding the ranch someday, his love of the changing seasons in the valley. She told him about Boston, about her years teaching at a small school before her parents died, about the books she loved and the places she dreamed of seeing. "Have you ever been to San Francisco?" Adelaide asked one evening. "Once, about 3 years ago. Went to sell some horses. It was too busy for my taste, but impressive all the same." Dalton leaned back in his chair. "Have you thought about teaching there instead of Sacramento?" "The city probably has more opportunities." "I had not considered it. My friend arranged the position in Sacramento, and I felt obligated to follow through. Would you want to live in a city like San Francisco? Adelaide thought about it. A few weeks ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now I am not so sure. I have enjoyed the quiet here more than I expected. The quiet can be lonely, though. So can a city full of people. She met his eyes across the firelight. Loneliness is not about how many people are around. It is about whether you connect with anyone. Dalton held her gaze for a long moment. That is very true. Something unspoken hung between them, a question neither was quite ready to voice. Adelaide looked away first, her heart beating faster than it should. A week after the storm, Dalton announced that the ford should be passable the next day. I will ride out early and check it myself. If it is safe, we can head to Stockton tomorrow afternoon. All right, Adelaide said, trying to keep her voice steady. That night, she lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through her tangled feelings. She had known Dalton Edwards for less than 2 weeks, but somehow he had become vitally important to her. The thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, felt wrong in a way she could not ignore. But what was the alternative? She could not simply invite herself to stay indefinitely. He had never suggested it, never given any indication that he wanted more than the friendly companionship they had shared. She was reading too much into his kindness, projecting her own growing feelings onto him. Except, sometimes, she caught him looking at her with an expression that suggested his feelings were not entirely neutral either. The way his hand would linger when helping her mount a horse, the warmth in his voice when he said her name, the small smile that appeared when she laughed at something he said. These things had to mean something. Or she was a fool, desperately inventing significance where none existed. Adelaide finally fell into a restless sleep, no closer to an answer than when she had lain down. The next morning, Dalton left early to check the ford as promised. Adelaide busied herself with packing her few belongings, though it took almost no time since she had so little. She made bread, more to keep her hands busy than because they needed it, and by the time Dalton returned mid-morning she was pacing the house like a caged animal. "The ford is clear," he announced, his tone carefully neutral. "We can leave after lunch if you are ready." "Yes, of course." "I am packed." Adelaide forced brightness into her voice. "Thank you for checking, Adelaide." Dalton took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "We need to talk before we go." Her heart jumped into her throat. "About what?" "About what happens when we get to Stockton." He set his hat on the table and faced her squarely. "I have been thinking about this for days, trying to figure out the right way to say it. The truth is I do not want you to leave." Adelaide felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "I know I have no right to ask. We have only known each other a short time and you have a teaching position waiting. But these past 2 weeks have been the best I have had in years, and it is all because of you." He took a step closer. "I look forward to waking up knowing you will be here. I enjoy our conversations and working alongside you. I find myself thinking about you when we are apart, wondering what you are doing or if you need anything. Dalton, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "I am not good with words and I am probably making a mess of this. What I am trying to say is that I have feelings for you, Adelaide, strong feelings. And if there is any chance you feel the same way, I would like you to consider staying here instead of going to Sacramento." Adelaide pressed a hand to her chest, feeling like her heart might burst. "You want me to stay, not as a guest. As my wife, if you will have me." He closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but out here people do not have the luxury of long courtships. When you find something good, you hold on to it. And you are good, Adelaide. The best thing that has happened to me in a very long time. Tears pricked at Adelaide's eyes. I thought I was imagining things. I thought you were just being kind because you felt sorry for me. Is that a yes? I have been miserable thinking about leaving, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude making me feel this way. But it is not gratitude, Dalton. I have fallen in love with you. The admission felt terrifying and wonderful all at once. I love your ranch and your quiet strength and the way you see the beauty in simple things. I love talking with you and working beside you. I love you. Dalton's face split into a grin that transformed his usually serious expression. Then you will stay. You will marry me. Yes, Adelaide laughed through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Adelaide wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she had found where she belonged. I promise I will do everything I can to make you happy, Dalton said against her hair. I know ranch life is hard and winters can be isolating, but I swear I will never let you regret this decision. I do not think I could regret it. Adelaide pulled back enough to look up at him. But what about my teaching? I do not want to just give it up entirely. There are children scattered around these parts whose families would probably jump at the chance for them to have lessons. You could teach from here, maybe set up a small school in Stockton if there is interest. We will figure it out together. Together. I like the sound of that. Dalton cupped her face in his calloused hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. May I kiss you? In answer, Adelaide rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, almost hesitant, but deepened as they both relaxed into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. We should still go to Stockton, Dalton said, his voice rough. We need a preacher, and you deserve a proper wedding even if it is just us and a few witnesses. I do not need anything fancy. Maybe not, but I want to do this right. He pressed another quick kiss to her forehead. How does 3 days from now sound? That gives us time to arrange things properly. Perfect. They rode to Stockton that afternoon, but everything felt different now. Adelaide sat in front of Dalton on his horse, his arms around her as he held the reins, and she felt absurdly happy. The future that had seemed so uncertain 2 weeks ago was now bright with promise. Stockton was a bustling town, larger than Adelaide had expected. The main street was lined with shops and businesses, and people hurried about their affairs with purposeful energy. Dalton led them to a hotel where he secured 2 rooms, insisting on propriety even though they were engaged. We have 3 days, he said as they stood in the hotel hallway. Let us do this properly. Adelaide agreed, though part of her felt like 3 days was an eternity to wait. The next morning, they visited the church and spoke with Reverend Thomas, a kind-faced man in his 60s who seemed delighted to perform a wedding ceremony. After that, Adelaide insisted on finding the general store to purchase fabric for a new dress. You do not have to make something new, Dalton protested. You look beautiful in what you have. I want to. Indulge me this one thing. He did, and Adelaide selected a lovely pale blue calico along with matching thread and new ribbons for her hair. She also bought sensible work dresses for ranch life and sturdy boots to replace her worn-out ones. Dalton tried to pay for everything, but Adelaide insisted on using her own money. I want to contribute something to our household, she explained. Please, let me do this. He relented, though he did sneak a beautiful ivory shawl into their purchases when he thought she was not looking. That evening, Dalton took Adelaide to dinner at the hotel restaurant, which was the fanciest establishment in town. They ate steak and potatoes and shared a bottle of wine while other diners smiled at them knowingly. Apparently news of the upcoming wedding had already spread through the small town. "Everyone is going to know our business," Adelaide said, amused. "That is the way of small communities. But they are good people for the most part. You will like them once you get to know them." "I am sure I will." Adelaide reached across the table and took his hand. "I am not worried about anything as long as I have you." Dalton raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You will always have me, Adelaide. I promise you that." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Adelaide sewed her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Henderson at the hotel, who turned out to be an excellent seamstress. She learned the names of the shopkeepers and met several ranch families who came to town for supplies. Everyone was welcoming, curious about the Eastern woman who was marrying Dalton Edwards, but friendly once they realized Adelaide was not putting on airs. On the evening before the wedding, Dalton took Adelaide for a walk along the edge of town where they could see the sunset. "Are you nervous?" he asked as they stood watching the sky turn orange and pink. "A little," Adelaide admitted. "Not about marrying you, but about everything changing so fast. 2 weeks ago I thought I knew what my life would be. Now it is completely different. Different good or different bad. Different wonderful." She leaned against his shoulder. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness, especially not after being abandoned in the desert. I thank God every day that I found you. If I had ridden out an hour later or taken a different path, we never would have met." "Do you believe in fate?" Dalton considered the question. "I believe God puts people in our path when we need them. Whether you call that fate or providence, I do not know, but I know I was meant to find you, Adelaide. I am certain of it. I feel the same way." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Tomorrow they would be married, and Adelaide would begin her new life as a rancher's wife. It was nothing like what she had planned, but it felt more right than anything she had ever done. The wedding took place at 10 o'clock in the morning at the small white church on the edge of town. Adelaide wore her new blue dress with the ivory shawl draped over her shoulders and wildflowers in her hair. Dalton had shaved and wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. They stood before Reverend Thomas with Mrs. Henderson and her husband serving as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief, but the vows they exchanged felt weighty with meaning. When Dalton slipped a simple gold band on Adelaide's finger and the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, she felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. Dalton kissed her gently, his own eyes suspiciously bright, and Adelaide knew she had made the right choice. After the ceremony, the Hendersons insisted on hosting a small wedding luncheon at the hotel. Several townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations and bring small gifts, preserves, a hand-stitched quilt, a set of good china plates. Adelaide was overwhelmed by the generosity and warmth. "You are one of us now," Mrs. Henderson explained. "We take care of our own out here." By late afternoon, Dalton and Adelaide were finally able to leave town and begin the journey back to the ranch. They rode together on Dalton's horse, with Adelaide's mare trailing behind on a lead rope, carrying their purchases. The sun was beginning to lower as they forded the river and entered the valley that was now Adelaide's home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Edwards," Dalton said as they approached the house. "It feels good to say that. Mrs. Edwards," Adelaide smiled. "I like it." Dalton helped her down from the horse and then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold? It is tradition." He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door, only setting her down once they were inside. "There. Now it is official." Adelaide laughed and pulled his face down to kiss him. "I love you, Dalton Edwards." "I love you too, Adelaide Edwards." That night they truly became husband and wife in every sense. Adelaide had been nervous, but Dalton was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Adelaide felt a sense of complete contentment she had never known before. "Are you happy?" Dalton whispered against her hair. "Happier than I have ever been." "Good. That is all I want, Adelaide, to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives." She fell asleep listening to his heartbeat, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The first months of marriage were an adjustment as they learned to live together as husband and wife, rather than friendly companions. Adelaide threw herself into making the house more of a home, sewing curtains for the windows and planting a vegetable garden near the kitchen. She learned to make bread the way Dalton liked it, and how to preserve meat for the winter. Dalton taught her to handle a rifle and how to read the weather signs that presaged storms. He showed her how to work with the cattle and horses, patiently explaining the intricacies of ranch management. Adelaide proved to be a quick learner, and soon she was helping with tasks beyond just cooking and cleaning. In early November, a rancher from a neighboring spread rode over with his 2 children, asking if Adelaide would be willing to teach them their letters. "My wife died last spring," the man explained, hat in hand. "The children have had no schooling since. I heard you were a teacher back east and thought maybe you could help." Adelaide agreed immediately, and soon she had 4 students, the rancher's children plus 2 others from nearby homesteads. She held lessons 3 mornings a week at the ranch, converting the spare bedroom into a makeshift schoolroom. Dalton built her a proper desk and shelves for books, proud of his wife's dedication to education. Winter arrived with the first snow in late November. The valley transformed into a wonderland of white, and Adelaide discovered the beauty of the changing seasons in this wild place. She and Dalton spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking about their days. "Are you happy here?" Dalton asked one evening as they sat together on the sofa, Adelaide's feet in his lap while he rubbed them. "I know winter can be isolating. I am very happy, more than I ever was in Boston." Adelaide set aside her mending and smiled at him. "I have you, meaningful work, and this beautiful place. What more could I want? I can think of one thing that might make our life more complete." "What is that?" Instead of answering, Dalton placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "A child, a family of our own." Adelaide covered his hand with hers, her heart swelling. "I would love that." "Do you think we are ready?" "I think we are as ready as anyone ever is. Besides, children need time to grow before they arrive. We have months to prepare. Then let us hope God blesses us with a child soon." He did, though they would not know it for certain until after Christmas. Adelaide suspected something was different when she began feeling queasy in the mornings, but she waited until she was certain before telling Dalton. She chose to tell him on New Year's Day, presenting him with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "We already exchanged gifts. Open it." Inside the package was a tiny pair of knitted booties. Dalton stared at them for a moment before understanding dawned. His head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with wonder. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? We are going to have a baby." "Sometime in August if my calculations are correct." Dalton let out a whoop of joy and pulled Adelaide into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents. I am going to be a father." "Yes, you are. Are you happy?" "Happy, Adelaide, I am over the moon." He set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" Adelaide laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of carrying on with normal activities. Still, you should not overdo it. No more lifting heavy things or working too hard. Dalton, I am not an invalid. I am merely pregnant. But there was no changing his mind. For the rest of her pregnancy, Dalton hovered and fussed, driving Adelaide half crazy with his concern while simultaneously making her feel deeply loved. He took over all the heavy chores, insisted she rest frequently, and rode to town every few weeks to bring back treats she mentioned craving. As her belly grew, Adelaide had to stop riding, which frustrated her until Dalton pointed out that she could still take the wagon if she wanted to visit her students or go to town. She continued teaching until she was 7 months along, finally stopping when it became too uncomfortable to stand for long periods. "I will resume in the fall after the baby comes," she told her students on her last day. "Until then, keep practicing your letters and rating." August arrived hot and dry. Adelaide felt huge and uncomfortable, ready for the baby to arrive. Dalton brought in Mrs. Henderson from Stockton 2 weeks before the due date to stay at the ranch and help with the birth. "First babies can be unpredictable," the older woman explained. "Better I am here early than you go into labor before I can arrive." Adelaide was grateful for the company and the experienced help. Mrs. Henderson had delivered dozens of babies over the years and was calm and confident in a way that eased Adelaide's nervousness. The labor started on a warm August evening just after supper. Adelaide felt the first contraction and calmly informed Mrs. Henderson that it was time. The older woman sent Dalton to boil water and gather clean linens, giving him tasks to keep him busy while she examined Adelaide. "Everything looks good," Mrs. Henderson said. "This will take some hours, but you are healthy and strong. You will do fine." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dalton paced the main room, jumping every time Adelaide cried out, feeling helpless and terrified. Finally, just after noon, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby and his wife's exhausted laugh. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Congratulations, Dalton. You have a son." A healthy, strong boy. Dalton rushed into the bedroom to find Adelaide propped up against pillows, sweaty and tired but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. As he approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Our son," Adelaide said softly. "What should we name him?" Dalton sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, and he felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "What about Thomas, after your father?" Adelaide suggested. "Thomas Edwards." "Thomas," Dalton repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Thomas Henry Edwards, after both our fathers." "Perfect." Adelaide smiled up at him. "Would you like to hold your son?" With Mrs. Henderson's guidance, Dalton carefully took the baby into his arms. Thomas made a small snuffling sound and then settled against his father's chest. Dalton looked down at the tiny life he and Adelaide had created and felt tears slip down his cheeks. "Thank you," he said to Adelaide. "Thank you for this gift, for our family, for saying yes when I asked you to stay. You have given me everything I ever wanted." "We gave these things to each other," Adelaide corrected gently. "I am just as blessed as you are, Dalton, more so, perhaps. You saved my life and gave me a home and a family and love. I could never repay you." "There is nothing to repay. We are just lucky we found each other." Mrs. Henderson stayed for another week, teaching Adelaide how to care for a newborn and making sure both mother and baby were thriving. When she finally returned to Stockton, she left behind a peaceful household where Thomas was settling into his new life. The first months with a baby were exhausting but joyful. Dalton doted on his son, getting up for nighttime feedings even though he could not nurse the baby, just so Adelaide would not be alone. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing old songs his mother had taught him. Adelaide resumed teaching in October, bringing Thomas with her to lessons. The students loved having a baby in the schoolroom, and the older girls would take turns helping care for him during lessons. Life fell into a new rhythm that included their son, and Adelaide marveled at how full her life had become. 2 years ago I was alone and scared, walking through the desert thinking I was going to die, she said to Dalton one evening as they sat watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. Now look at us. A family, a home, everything I ever wanted but never thought I could have. I thank God for that wagon train's cowardice, Dalton said. If they had not abandoned you, you would not be here now. Something good came from something terrible. Yes, it did. The years that followed brought more blessings. When Thomas was 2, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret after Dalton's mother. 2 years after that came another son, James, who had his mother's blonde hair and his father's gray eyes. The ranch prospered under Dalton's careful management, and they were able to expand their herd and improve their property. Adelaide's school grew as more families moved into the area, and eventually she had 8 regular students and several others who came sporadically. You should build a proper schoolhouse in Stockton, Dalton suggested one evening when she was lamenting the cramped conditions in their spare room. There are enough children now to justify it. That would require money and approval from the town council. I will provide the money. You work on the council. Adelaide did, presenting her case to the town leaders that spring. The council agreed, and by the following fall, Adelaide was teaching in a real schoolhouse with desks, a chalkboard, and proper textbooks. She rode into town 3 days a week, bringing her own children with her, while Dalton managed the ranch with help from 2 hired hands. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, years when cattle prices fell and money was tight. Thomas broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 7, and Margaret nearly died from pneumonia at age 4. But through all the challenges, Adelaide and Dalton faced them together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Adelaide back to the spot by the river where he had proposed. "You remember this place?" he asked. "Of course. How could I forget? I wanted to bring you back here to tell you that I would choose you all over again. These 10 years have been the best of my life, and I look forward to 50 more just like them." Adelaide wiped away happy tears. "I would choose you too, every single time. You saved me, Dalton, in more ways than one. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined. We saved each other, I think. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of living without really understanding what life could be. You taught me how to truly live, how to laugh and love and appreciate every moment." They stood together in the place where they had confessed their love so many years ago, watching the river flow past just as it always had. Around them, their valley was green with spring growth, and in the distance they could see the smoke from their chimney where their children were being watched by one of the ranch hands. "We have built a good life," Adelaide said, "the best life." Dalton pulled her close and kissed her tenderly. And it all started with a wagon train's cruelty and a chance encounter in the desert. Funny how the worst moments can lead to the best things. Not funny, miraculous. Yes, Dalton agreed, looking into the eyes of the woman who had transformed his world. Miraculous. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Dalton watched their children grow and thrive in the Nevada Valley. Thomas proved to have his father's love of ranching and spent every spare moment following Dalton around, learning everything he could about cattle and horses. Margaret was more like her mother, bookish and thoughtful, often reading in the shade of the cottonwoods by the river. James was the adventurer, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief that kept his parents on their toes. When Thomas turned 16, Dalton gave him a section of land adjoining the main ranch to manage as his own. The boy threw himself into the work with enthusiasm, proving himself capable beyond his years. Adelaide watched with pride as her son developed into a responsible young man who treated the land and animals with respect. Margaret showed an aptitude for teaching, often helping her mother at the schoolhouse. "I want to be a teacher like you," she announced at age 14. "But I want to teach in San Francisco or Sacramento, somewhere with a real school." Adelaide encouraged her daughter's ambitions even as part of her heart broke at the thought of Margaret leaving. "You should follow your dreams," she told the girl. "Your father and I will support whatever you choose to do." When Margaret turned 18, she left for Sacramento to attend normal school for teacher training. It was difficult saying goodbye, but Adelaide took comfort in knowing her daughter was pursuing her passion. They exchanged letters weekly, and Margaret came home for Christmas and summer holidays. James announced at 15 that he wanted to be a veterinarian. "Someone has to look after all these animals," he said with a grin. "Might as well be me." Adelaide and Dalton found the money to send him to study in San Francisco when he was old enough, proud that their children were taking advantage of opportunities they had not had themselves. When Thomas was 20, he married a rancher's daughter named Sarah from a neighboring spread. Adelaide watched her son exchange vows with a mixture of joy and bittersweet nostalgia, remembering her own wedding day so many years ago. The young couple built a house on Thomas's section of land and started their own family within a year. "We are grandparents," Dalton said in wonder when Thomas brought his newborn daughter to visit. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? Speak for yourself," Adelaide teased. "I am in my prime." Indeed, at 45, Adelaide was still vibrant and active. Her hair had threads of silver now, and there were lines around her eyes, but she remained healthy and energetic. Dalton, at 53, had gone almost completely gray, but he was still strong from his ranch work. They settled into the rhythm of middle age, taking pride in their children's accomplishments and spoiling their grandchildren. The schoolhouse in Stockton thrived under Adelaide's leadership, and she trained several young women to take over her classes when she decided to reduce her teaching schedule. "I want to spend more time here," she explained to Dalton. "I have been teaching for 30 years. I am ready to slow down a bit. You have earned the rest. You have taught half the children in this county at one point or another." Adelaide did not stop teaching entirely, but she limited herself to private students and her grandchildren. She spent more time in her garden and took up painting, creating watercolors of the valley she loved. Dalton, too, began to hand over more ranch responsibilities to Thomas, though he still rode out most days to check on things. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party at the Stockton Hotel. Nearly 100 people attended, former students and their families, ranch neighbors, and townspeople who had known the Edwards family for decades. Adelaide was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection and respect. "I cannot believe how many lives you have touched," Margaret said, gesturing to the crowded room. "Half these people learned to read from you, Mother. Teaching was my calling. I am just grateful I got the chance to do it." Later, when the party had wound down and they were riding home in the wagon, Dalton took Adelaide's hand. 25 years. It has gone by so fast. Not for me. I have savored every moment, even the hard times, even those. They made the good times sweeter." Adelaide leaned against his shoulder. I love you just as much now as I did that day in Stockton when you asked me to marry you. More even, because now I know exactly what we built together. I love you more than life itself, Adelaide. You are my miracle." They continued on in comfortable silence, the familiar road leading them home. Above, stars glittered in the clear Nevada sky, the same stars that had watched over them on that first night when Dalton had found Adelaide dying in the desert. So much had changed since then, but the essential truth remained the same: they belonged together. The years continued their steady march. Margaret married a teacher she met in Sacramento and gave Adelaide and Dalton 2 more grandchildren. James finished his studies and opened a veterinary practice in Virginia City, though he came home frequently to help with the ranch animals. Thomas and Sarah had 4 children who ran wild on the ranch, just as their father had done before them. Adelaide marked her 60th birthday surrounded by children and grandchildren, her face wreathed in smiles as they sang to her and presented a cake. She looked around at the family she and Dalton had created and felt profound gratitude for the path her life had taken. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked her later when everyone had left and they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "I was thinking about that day the wagon train left me. How terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. If someone had told me then that I would end up here with you with all of this, I would not have believed them." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "We gave it to each other," Dalton corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You taught me what it meant to truly live. We were lucky then that fate brought us together." "Not fate, providence. We were meant to find each other, Adelaide. I believe that with everything in me." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. The valley spread before them, green and peaceful in the fading light. Somewhere down by the river, their grandchildren were playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you have any regrets?" Adelaide asked. "Not a single one, you." "None. This life has been everything I ever wanted and more." Dalton raised her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. "Here is to the rest of our years together, however many God grants us." "To the rest of our years," Adelaide agreed. They stood and went inside together, closing the door on another perfect day in their imperfect but beautiful life. Behind them, the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of glory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, but they would face them together as they had faced everything for the past 30 years, in the bedroom that had once been Dalton's mother's and was now theirs. Adelaide sat at her dressing table while Dalton helped her take down her hair. It was a nightly ritual they had performed for decades, one of countless small intimacies that made up a life shared. "I saw Thomas riding the north fence line today," Dalton said as he brushed her hair. "He is doing a fine job with his section, better than I did at his age. He learned from the best. He learned from necessity. That is the best teacher." Dalton set down the brush and pressed a kiss to the top of Adelaide's head. "Our children turned out well. We should be proud." "I am. They are good people, all of them, kind and hardworking and honest. They got that from their mother." Adelaide turned on the bench to face him. "They got it from both of us. You are the kindest, most honest man I have ever known, Dalton Edwards. Our children are blessed to have you as their father." He smiled, that gentle smile she loved so much. "Come to bed, my love. Morning comes early even when you are old ranchers like us." They settled into bed together, Adelaide's head on Dalton's shoulder in the position they had slept in for 30 years. Outside, the night sounds of the valley created a peaceful symphony, crickets chirping, the river flowing, the occasional lowing of cattle. "Dalton," Adelaide said into the darkness. Yes, thank you. For what? For finding me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Adelaide, my darling, you never have to thank me for any of that. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. She felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. I love you. I love you too. Now sleep. Tomorrow we are watching the grandchildren while Thomas and Sarah go to town. Remember? Adelaide laughed softly. How could I forget? Those children have more energy than a whole wagon train. They are good practice for keeping us young. Nothing can keep us young at this point. But they do keep us happy. That they do. Adelaide drifted off to sleep feeling blessed beyond measure. The woman who had been abandoned in the desert all those years ago was gone, replaced by this older, wiser, infinitely happier version who had found love and purpose in the most unexpected of places. The years continued their march, bringing the usual joys and sorrows. Dalton developed arthritis in his knees that made riding difficult some days. Adelaide's eyesight weakened, and she needed spectacles for reading. But they adapted, supporting each other through each new challenge. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them and their memories. 40 years, Adelaide marveled. Where did the time go? Into building a life, raising children, loving each other. Time well spent, I would say. The best spent. They reminisced about their early days, laughing over remembered mishaps and tender moments. The wagon train abandonment that had once been so traumatic was now just the beginning of their story, the crisis that had brought them together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that wagon train had not left you? Dalton asked. Sometimes. I suppose I would have gone to Sacramento, taught school, maybe married eventually, but I cannot imagine it would have been as happy as what we have had together. I would have stayed here alone, growing old and set in my ways, never knowing what I was missing. We saved each other then. Yes, we did. As they entered their 70s, both Adelaide and Dalton slowed significantly. Dalton could no longer do heavy ranch work, leaving most of it to Thomas and the hired hands. Adelaide stopped teaching entirely, though she still tutored her grandchildren when they needed help. Their days became quieter, filled with reading and light gardening and watching their family grow. Thomas took over full management of the ranch, handling it with the skill and dedication his father had taught him. Their grandchildren were growing up, some starting families of their own. Adelaide and Dalton became great-grandparents, marveling at the babies who carried their legacy into the future. 4 generations, Adelaide said, holding her newest great-granddaughter. Can you believe it? I can believe it because I see the proof. Dalton sat beside her, watching the baby with wonder. We started all of this, you and I. God started it. We just said yes when He brought us together. Best yes I ever said. One evening in early autumn, when Adelaide was 74 and Dalton 82, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The air had that crisp quality that presaged winter, and the cottonwoods along the river were turning gold. It is beautiful, Adelaide said softly. It is, though not as beautiful as you, she laughed. You need your eyes checked, old man. I am wrinkled and gray. You are distinguished and silver, and you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. He took her hand. Adelaide, if I have never said it enough, thank you for the life you gave me, for saying yes all those years ago, for staying and loving me and building this family with me. You made my life worth living. Dalton Edwards, what has gotten into you? You sound like you are saying goodbye. Not goodbye, just making sure you know how much you mean to me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. When the stars came out, Dalton helped Adelaide inside, and they prepared for bed in their usual routine. Adelaide woke in the early hours of the morning to find the bed beside her empty. She rose and found Dalton sitting in his chair by the fireplace, staring at the dying embers. "Cannot sleep?" she asked, just thinking. "Come sit with me." She settled onto his lap despite their combined age, and he wrapped his arms around her. "I love you, Adelaide. Never forget that. I love you too. Always." They sat together in the darkness, two souls perfectly matched, holding each other as they had for 41 years. When morning came, Adelaide woke to find herself still in Dalton's arms. "Dalton," she said softly. He did not answer. Adelaide pulled back to look at his face and saw immediately that he was gone. His expression was peaceful, his arms still around her. Dalton Edwards had died as he had lived, holding the woman he loved, in the home they had built together. The grief was overwhelming, but even through her tears, Adelaide felt grateful. They had been blessed with over 4 decades together, had raised 3 children, and seen their family grow to include grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Dalton had lived a full, happy life surrounded by love. The funeral was held at the church in Stockton, packed with family and friends who came to pay their respects. Thomas delivered the eulogy, speaking of his father's integrity, kindness, and devotion to family. Adelaide sat in the front pew surrounded by her children and grandchildren, dry-eyed and dignified, though her heart was breaking. They buried Dalton on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree he had always loved. The valley spread before the grave site, the river glinting in the sunlight and the mountains rising in the distance. It was a fitting resting place for a man who had loved the land so deeply. After the funeral, Adelaide returned to the house that now felt too empty. Her children wanted her to come stay with one of them, but she refused. "This is my home. I am not leaving it." She understood their concern. She was 74 years old and alone, but Adelaide was not ready to give up her independence, not yet. Thomas and Sarah lived close enough to check on her daily, and her other children visited as often as they could. The days and weeks after Dalton's death were difficult. Adelaide would find herself talking to him before remembering he was gone. She would reach for him in the night and find only empty space. But gradually, the sharp edge of grief dulled into something she could carry. She spent her days tending her garden, reading and visiting with her grandchildren. She wrote long letters to Margaret and James, sharing memories of their father and passing along wisdom she had learned over a lifetime. She attended church every Sunday and helped organize charitable efforts for families in need. On what would have been their 42nd wedding anniversary, Adelaide walked up the hill to Dalton's grave. She brought wildflowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone, talking to him as if he could hear. "I miss you every day," she told him. "But I know you are at peace, and that brings me comfort. You lived a good life, Dalton Edwards. You were loved beyond measure." She stayed until the sun began to set, then made her way back down the hill to the house. Inside, she lit a lamp and sat in Dalton's chair by the fireplace, something she had not been able to do until now. As she sat there, Adelaide reflected on the incredible journey her life had been. From the terrified girl abandoned in the desert to the woman she had become: wife, mother, grandmother, teacher, beloved member of a community. All because a kind-hearted rancher had found her and offered her not just rescue but love. Adelaide lived for 5 more years after Dalton's death, dying peacefully in her sleep at age 79. She was buried beside her husband on the hill, their headstones standing side by side overlooking the valley they had loved. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered for the funeral, celebrating a life well lived. Stories were shared of Adelaide's kindness, her dedication to education, and the deep love she and Dalton had shared. They were meant to be together, Margaret said to her brothers as they stood by their parents' graves. From that first day when Father found her until the day they died, they belonged to each other. They built something lasting, Thomas added, gesturing to the gathered family. All of us are here because they found each other, because they chose love. They set an example for us all, James agreed. That kind of love, that kind of partnership, it is rare. We are blessed to have had them as parents. The family eventually left the hillside, returning to the ranch house where food and fellowship awaited. But the legacy of Adelaide and Dalton Edwards lived on in every child and grandchild, in the ranch that still bore the Edwards name, in the school Adelaide had helped build, and in the countless lives they had touched. Years later, when the youngest great-grandchildren asked about their great-great-grandparents, the story was told of how Adelaide Crawford was abandoned by a wagon train and found by a rancher named Dalton Edwards. How he gave her shelter and kindness, and how that kindness blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. They saved each other, the older generation would say, and they built a legacy of love that continues in all of us. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management and eventually passed to his oldest son. The schoolhouse in Stockton was renamed Adelaide Crawford Edwards Elementary School in honor of the woman who had dedicated 30 years to educating the children of the county. A small plaque inside the building told the story of the teacher from Boston who came west seeking a new life and found love in the desert. On the hill overlooking the valley, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still legible. Dalton Edwards, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Adelaide Crawford Edwards, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. Between them was carved a simple message, together in life, together in eternity. And in the house below, generations of Edwards family members continued to gather, sharing meals and stories and love, carrying forward the legacy of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. The story of Adelaide and Dalton became part of local legend, told and retold with small embellishments over the years. But the essential truth remained unchanged. Theirs was a love story for the ages, born from tragedy and transformed into triumph through courage, kindness, and an unwavering commitment to each other. In the end, the wagon train's cruelty had led to the greatest blessing of Adelaide's life. Being abandoned had brought her exactly where she needed to be, to the man she was meant to love, in the place she was meant to call home. It was proof, perhaps, that even our darkest moments can lead to our greatest joys if we are brave enough to see them through. And so the valley continued its eternal rhythms, the river flowing and the seasons changing, while on the hill 2 souls rested side by side, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their place in history assured not through grand gestures but through the quiet accumulation of days well lived and love faithfully given.